This is State of Surveillance, podcast number 3, 19th of March 2015.
Okay, so I'm Katrina Day again, and previously on the first podcast I left on where we spoke about the corruption of knowledge as the person was trusting the authority and asking the authority what was best for the loved one, whether it was a pet or a child, and the authority was recommending something which is not very good in future for the child or the pet, but trust the authority. So that's the corruption of knowledge. And that is very dangerous because we need to fall back on our knowledge and our free will when we have to collect our thoughts and make a decision. So we will have this corrupt hard disk in our mind when we refer back to it, and that is a very dangerous thing to have. Now, I wanted to talk about the biometric bracelet, but before I move on to that, because we never briefly said anything to record on the Bodily Integrity Act, which is the legislative change we want to take in Parliament so that minors will never be microchipped or digitally tattooed, because you cannot give anything like cigarettes or alcohol to the minor because he's below the age of concern, and the adults will have to give their consent, informed consent. In other words, if they don't want it and they are undergoing any particular thing, such as the surgery, and it's a reconstructive surgery, the parts that they're given for their body need to be free of digital hallmark or anything digital inside, so that it's not trackable and hackable. And the paperwork should provide the traceability of those implants. If the prisoner says no, an alternative should be found. And the person who's got Alzheimer's, for instance, should not be microchipped because he or she is not corpus mentis. In other words, that is the law which is adopted by one small county in California. We want to have this similar law in England, in Britain, so that before all this comes in, we are legally protected from getting microchipped. And now I think that several developments have brought on something to ease us into it. And I was going to talk about the bracelet introduced by Halifax, which is operating on individual heart pulsation. And there are 3 points of concern there. First of all, trackable and hackable. In other words, if the company and government can find anywhere in the crowd, you can be singled out by your unique heart pulsation. And if any harm wants to be caused to you, anybody wants to cause you harm, such as heart attack, easy done. Hackable as well by other malicious sources. And 2, insurance companies will share the data. We know that they share the data and may state that according to this particular heartbeat or heart pulsation, the customer has is genetically prone to have any future heart condition, and they may demand earlier rectification of this problem by surgery, such as heart bypass, or they may raise the premiums because of having this potential genetic problem. And just sideline, the genetic problems are not as specific as we know, because doctors don't really know what's happening with that. They are given a leaflet, but they may not know that the new genetically modified, the new generation corn and new generation wheat are designed to do a random Christmas light bulb event, such as turn on the genes that are meant to forever be turned off in our body. In other words, we go through our life and we reproduce and die at an age which is considered the elderly age, because those things are never turned on. They're always turned off. But if you to take some of this stuff, it will turn on the genes that are designed to be turned off and are triggered to be turned off forever. And we may end up having some genetic disorders, and they will tell us, oh, it's genetic, you've got it in your genes. In fact, it is environmental. In other words, it's a can of worms, and if you open your body up to this kind of scrutiny, it's anybody's game. They could come up and say anything. Now, point 3 is that currently we do not have any confirmed research data of this unique heart pulsation in correlation with the brain neuron waves. The waves that can be manipulated, demodulated into text, and the text directly transferred into someone's brain. In this case, if this data comes up and is found that the translation of these brain waves can be connected to the heart pulsation, and the reverse transfer of text into the brain or demodulation of the brain waves can happen via the heart pulsation, which we don't know yet. But if that happens, if that data is found and this research is there, then we've got more trouble than we actually thought we had. And because I was going to discuss the BRAIN project, there's more research on BRAIN project than it is on hearts. And BRAIN project is that we rewire our neurons when we study, when we learn, and this is for public, we probably know, and we probably also know, and again, I just want to briefly repeat that Nikola Tesla at the end of the 19th century and turn of the 20th century said that brain waves can be translated into words and can be listened to, and he was ridiculed for that. As a heavyweight physicist, he went and worked with Thomas Edison in America in 1920s, and the Nazis, Hitler and his team found a very good use of Tesla's research, and they put it to practice in their Operation Paperclip. When I was researching the Operation Paperclip, discovered that all this environmental effect of Germany being in such condition, impoverished condition, when those who were in charge were not ethnically German or were different from that, and naturally in the impoverished country, resentment turned to those people, against those people. There was this resentment, but an extra layer was done with radio waves. In other words, if your brain waves are looked at and your thresholds of anger, embarrassment, and anxiety, all these curves are deciphered, there is a collective anxiety or collective anger, as well as the individual one in between. And now the research has gone that far. The collective one is known, but individual anger thresholds are known within collective anger. Thresholds of fear, anxiety, as well as exultation. People there shouting "Hi Hitler" or getting very angry or doing what they did, it's obvious that there was an enhancement of their anger with the radio waves. What we know about Nazis is that they sent out the radio signal to the space saying, "Oh, we are the advanced culture," but they had more there in the Operation Paperclip. So this kind of radio waves are used to sabotage person's learning process, because we rewire our neurons when we learn, and it could be sabotaging somebody's career, it could be causing bullying or domestic violence, or any riots that we've seen in the current history very recently, whether it's Egypt or Tunisia, and it's said that it's ruled by disorder. In other words, if there is a big disorder, you could rule easily. And that is the fact that the brain waves can be used for that. Now, radio waves affect our perception and thus create the memory that becomes knowledge, and it influences our sensory equipment, which may well be the link with the BRAIN project, because it's the feeling translated into heart pulsation. But currently we don't know that. What we know is that the perception of mine, how I get on with another person, how I perceive the environment, is dependent on how I look at and on my sensory equipment. And the other person's sensory equipment may be better, more trained, and he can pick up more from the environment. Now, if I end up with kind of poisoned brain waves, I feel I develop a bad feeling in my environment. I may fall out with people, and therefore bad memory is created. So this is a kind of worms, and my bad memory can affect me in my future decisions, and therefore I can be manipulated through those brain waves. So it's a bit lucky that we are not talking about the bracelet which is picking up our brain waves, although we know that Google Glass and Windows recent glasses, Windows 10, I believe, do pick up the vibrations of our neurons. And in that way, it may be quite easy that it's translated into the instructions we give to the mobile phone, which we have got on our head. And we take an email, or we take a phone call, or we take the image of what we see, or take a photo, etc., etc. But what we don't know whilst we're doing this, and we think we are empowered by it, it's somebody else also managing our brain waves and actually picks up all sorts of different vibrations from us, and later on that vibration can be used. Now, just briefly, I wanted to say that once in the early 2000s, I was training people on databases. They were engineers, an engineering company, the name I'm not going to mention. There was this chap who came up, and he had large base of data and wanted to categorize and put the data in order. And he had the data of all the animals, fish, as well as birds, avian species that hear different sound waves. And each species hears different sound wave and acts upon it, and could be irritated by that. Even in those days, I thought how dangerous that can be if this research was picked up by a military organization and they could completely disturb the life of, or ruin the economy of a small country, a farm community, the wolf attack, because the wolves get annoyed by some radio waves. And this is all real. And they also, the problem is that the chap was very involved in it, but he was involved in his narrow corridor of research, and what he didn't know what another department was doing, because that particular engineering company, if you want to go from one department to another department, you have to swipe a card. In those days, it was just a barcode card. Which means that you don't meet other people, you never see the big picture, how your research is applied to. You may be told, well, the application of your research is that you've got this ultraviolet rat beam. If you've got mice in your garden, you don't want them to come in your house. You have this rat beam, then you can raise that beam and it can be directed against foxes or against hedgehogs or against bigger species. But that is a very simple application. There can be, in other words, you give such a beam to the rat that the poor rat runs away. But it can be done against humans. Just to sum up that, in other words, we have got at the moment some development which is trying to ease us off into wearing a bracelet where our heart pulsation will log us into our account in Halifax. And I think it is a landmark development because it is connected to our heart, to our health matters. And why would somebody want to broadcast the heartbeat on the internet, an individual heart palpitation? Carry on.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Just as a sort of a broad, generalized point, I think we all recognize now that for many years, probably at least 2 decades, various institutions have been looking at trying to influence human behavior. And at the most benign level, it's called marketing. But that has grown progressively more sophisticated in what it's aimed to do. And it's not just about selling a particular product, it's also about selling ideas. And that's well recognized in the advertising and marketing industry, that it's not just about trying to sell a product, it's about trying to sell a lifestyle. And, a whole bunch of ideas that go along with it. Now, what's happening is that the techniques for observing the attitudes of subjects, to be able to influence them, to be able to see how well the feedback works in a particular individual, all of those techniques are becoming more sophisticated. And one way you could say it is it's just Moore's law that's being applied as the various techniques, as the computation power increases, it becomes easier to do it. But on the other hand, there are sustained research budgets. The thing to understand about all of this is if it's being done commercially, it's paying for itself. And that for the amount of money they're putting in, they're getting more money back. So it has to be working. Businesses do not put money into things that don't work. You know, they might try and experiment, but they don't keep on for decade after decade. And I think that's the thing that we actually have to realize here. Something's working. This is actually doing what it says it is. So now, whether or not it's at this point viable to achieve, well, at this point we just simply don't know what it's viable to achieve in terms of monitoring brainwaves because it just hasn't been published. But it's obviously got to be a matter of concern that the techniques are becoming progressively more invasive in what they're trying to do.
It is working because if you go in the supermarket and you want to buy a loaf of bread, you end up buying bread and cheese and cleaning liquid because you think that it's all there, nobody's interfering, and you don't come back in. But guess what? Tomorrow you discover you've got some potatoes and you go back in and buy a load more stuff. In other words, the psychology of what they are operating with is working. It's getting you to spend more. More than that, they have got research that if you release the hormone, male hormone, for instance, in these where females are shopping, females end up shopping more, and vice versa. In other words, the way we learn is what excites us. You learn by love, excite, likes, as well as embarrassment. So if there is something that is hormonally at you, you go into a different mode and you buy more. So it's those research things have paid off. The trouble is that how are we going to fight it? Because there's more money, and I forgot to mention the charities. Those charities are tax-free organization. They accept gift donations, and if somebody gives them 3 million a gift donation, he will have a great say in what the charity will stand up for. And we know that the dog charities, animal charities, were all for microchipping animals. Now we've got children's charities, charities for soldiers. What are they going to do when microchip comes in? Oh, it is here now. You see, this is our trouble, that there is big money changing hands and charities are very vulnerable. Carry on.
Both of you brought up some very good points. This is Steve from San Antonio, Texas. Actually, yesterday on the news, I did see where, like Kat was talking about, where they're going to put like this bracelet on. And this was actually on the news. And then they can identify you by your heartbeat. When you walk into a building where a door will open for you by your heartbeat. The doctors can recognize you if you're laying in a hospital bed. They can recognize you, patient so-and-so is in this room. Just because you have the bracelet on, they can recognize you by your heartbeat. Now, I've been doing, I don't do a whole lot of reading on the net about, what we're up to. I see a lot of mine on the news, but I do see a lot of stuff happen out of Sweden and Switzerland where they're practicing this, on a daily basis. Nathan is absolutely correct. This is all about marketing. And like I had said in the past, this is all about controlling people, power, and getting to sell a product. We as people, we are no longer people. We are considered numbers to them. So if they can take that number and increase that sales to that particular number, then they can sit there and market to every one of these numbers now, because we are no longer people. We are all numbers, and that's all it is. We have been reduced to just a commodity. Steve had said earlier that this is all about getting away from the monetary system. So it's all about digital money. I was thinking about that yesterday and the day before. If you noticed, and I noticed this about, I'd say almost about 15 years ago, how everybody kept telling me, hey, would you like your paycheck just deposited onto a card? And I was like, no, because I want access to my cash whenever I want cash. So for, 20, 30, 40 years now, they've been trying to stop the monetary part of our civilization, to where they want to put everything all digital on cards where you never have to use cash anymore. Then for a little while there, they wanted to go back to the gold standard where they got rid of the dollar bill and everybody had to carry around these coins. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm not going to carry $100 worth of gold coins in my pocket, you know. So what they're doing now is forcing everybody to put all their money on their cards, and it's all about control, marketing, and selling to that person and to each individual according to their needs and what they like and what they want. I'm not going to lie to you. When I was younger, I thought it was cool to track like bears and panthers and cougars in the wild that, you know, were a nuisance. They could track them to see if they were coming into like when I lived in Colorado Springs. I always had some mountain lion walking down the middle of Colorado Springs, so they would catch them, put a tag on them, so they could track that animal, see where it's at. I thought that was all right. I didn't have any problem with that, but I also knew it was coming for humans. Kat touched on something really important is the children. The other day, my cousin was debating this with me. He says, he goes, you always talk about how they're inserting this microchip into the babies. My little cousin was just born, and he doesn't have a microchip in his foot. And I was like, well, how do you know he doesn't? Because they don't need permission to do it anymore. All they do is put a little slice on a little baby's foot, and they slide his chip in there, and it will stay with him or her to the end.
Can I just interject? It's an interesting point that you made about payment, because payment is configured for identification. Now, it doesn't have to be that payment has to be linked to identification. There could be forms of anonymous payment. But the way everything's been set up, payment is ID. It comes from a bank account of a named person. And so whenever you have a toll or anything else, it's payment and it's identification. And so all of the charges that we get in our society are just another means of tracking us. Payment is a good way of tracking us. So,
can I just come back to something that Kat, your initial talk was amazing. You took us through so many aspects of radio frequency and what it does. I just wanted to, as you were talking, I was making some notes because radio frequency devices are used in the old age pensioner homes in Canada and America. They use them to geofence them. So they set up a geofence around the building and around the grounds, and they can track where the people are in the particular area. And if they step out of an area, the chip sends a warning to the system so the people know, so the people running the home can go and trace. So I mean, I think a good application. I mean, at the moment we've got tagging in the UK, so you have a radio frequency, a GPS device around your ankle. So we're already using radio frequency to geofence people. And you could do the same thing with your child. There was in Australia they have a little wristband where you can geofence your swimming pool or a certain area around your swimming pool. So if your child goes near that area, the parent who's presumably doing something in the house will be alerted that the child has gone to a certain area. Now, to me, it takes away the human in us when you do something like that, because parents should be with their children, watching that they're not going near the swimming pool. People should be caring for old people sufficiently that they don't wander off and they don't lose people. And I think we're sort of abdicating a lot of our humanity to what this tech can do. And then you also sort of went on to the heartbeat thing, and I think the application of the way that you can determine what a heartbeat is you have to run a little electrical current through the heart, don't you? So I think when you take, they're not actually taking it from the wrist and the information they're getting from the wrist, they're actually looking at the electrical pulse that the heart emits. That's the unique biometric that we have, and that's so we would be, if we had a receiver on us, that would actually be reading us via a tiny little electrical pulse. But going back to that, I don't know if anybody's heard of a guy called Greg Braden, but he did a fascinating talk in Italy about 2 or 3 years ago, talking about the effect the heart can have on people and the effect it can have on mass with people. And there's an institute in America called the Heart Math Institute, which is a scientific institute that looks at the effects that the heart and the heart waves and heartbeats can have on individuals and mass people. And it's really interesting that we're sort of going into this area of heart and brainwave. Going back to sort of the brainwave biometric, and I'm flitting around now, but I'm sort of thinking all about the things you were talking about. They do actually have a brainwave biometric for security cars, so that when a guy that's driving gold bullion or a large amount of material is around, they can actually, in the headrest, there's a monitor that can read the brain activity to see whether or not they've had drugs, or whether or not they're too tired, or whether or not they've maybe had a drink, or whether or not they plan on intending on robbing. Who knows what they can... Do you know what I mean? So these technologies are just coming in at the moment. But yeah, it is really interesting, and I think it is, like you say, if they're doing it commercially, it's working. I think Nathan made that point, and it's and also as well, if it is being introduced commercially, what have the military been doing for the past sort of 10, 20 years? It's come from there. The biometrics have come from military. RFID has come from military. The very first computer games we got that were aeroplane simulations came from the military. So, you know, where are they at now? If we're getting this, where are they at?
I was saying that the drone operators, for instance, they can operate the drones by having a head set which has got electrical currents there, picks up their neurons, and they don't have to touch anything. They can operate the drone like that. This is dehumanizing, because obviously they're killing people somewhere, millions and millions of miles away, thousands of miles away, and they just think that they're playing a video game, nothing else. That can be done. And another thing is that if these people think that it's empowering them by controlling something with their brain, it's not. Somebody else is picking up their brain waves, that it can be manipulated. It can be, your anger can be picked up. So if somebody all of a sudden comes in the house and makes you angry, you produce a wave. That wave is picked up and it can be enhanced with radio waves more. In other words, next time you get angry, you can get angrier. And that can get angrier and angrier, or you could get more and more anxiety. So you become a totally abnormal person. You get very angry very quickly, you flare up very quickly, you enter into anxiety mode very quickly. So it can be going against you. They can manipulate you. So if you think that you are manipulating a drone or something, or a mobile phone with your head, in other words, somebody else is manipulating your head, and that's the danger. If the heart and brain correlation exists, they are trying to manipulate us by our emotional intelligence, and they're going backwards to our brain, and that is very, very dangerous. That's what I was saying. So carry on.
I just wanted to say that you hit on 3 points. Pippa, 2 points that you hit on is, and Nathan as well. This is all being sold under the guise of security and convenience. Also, I saw a show I've seen that show probably maybe 3-4 times now. I watched the sci-fi channel a lot, the science channel, I'm sorry. They actually had a guy flying a helicopter, small helicopter, with his brain. They had put a helmet on him, and all he had to do was think about it, and he lifted that helicopter up, and he could fly it around the room. And then they had another guy flying a drone. And then they had another guy where they put a helmet on him. And I'm not quite sure how they did this, but they were able to manipulate his sight because he was blind. And they were sending signals through his brain so that he could actually see for the first time something that he's never ever seen before. And they connected straight to his brain, a computer. And they had they looked like these goggles on him, and those were his eyes, and they're basically like glasses. And so whatever the glasses saw, it sent a signal to his brain, and then it allowed him to see for the first time, but yet he was still totally blind. This is all manipulation. They're coming at us at many different ways, whether it be biometrics, RFID, quote unquote scientific enhancements, things to help the people, all this stuff, all the sci-fi stuff we've seen, it's all because they're trying to control us one way or another. Now look at Bill Gates. He truly thinks that if you get to the age of 65, you should die. He wants to start eliminating people at 65 and above because they can no longer contribute to society. Him and his wife believe that it's kind of like that movie Soylent Green. You get to a certain age, you've got to go. But, of course, when he gets age 65 and his wife gets age 65, of course, they're still contributing to society because, they invented this thing, But it's funny how it never affects the rich, but for folks like us, oh, you're no longer like me. I'm on disability. What happens when I get 65? They're going to want to turn me off. Like Kat said, what if they put a chip inside me and say, okay, it's time for him to go? Boop. They turn the channel off and I drop dead on the spot. People are going to hear this podcast. They're going to laugh at us, make fun of us, think we're crazy nutballs. But I tell you what, it's out there. It's out there. I've talked about RFID for years, and now you see it on television almost every single day. It's on the internet every single day, and people still refuse to believe it and see it. They just refuse it. But why? Because they have this mentality of, it doesn't affect me, I don't care. But they don't understand. It does affect you. It is affecting you now. Because people like us who are standing up and talking about it, spreading the message, spreading the word, we're doing the right thing. But it's those who say, I would like to have that chip because I'm tired of turning on the light with my hand. Really?
My
Nathan, do you want to have a...
Yeah, I'll just mention one point quickly, and that is, of course, governments are in the business of manipulating people's moods as well. Now, we're coming up to the first day of spring, the 21st of March, and that's the World Happiness Day. And, of course, there's this agenda of trying to achieve greater happiness through subjective means rather than objective means. So rather than giving people the things that they want, they're just trying to influence their attitudes, their subjective attitudes to what's happening around them. And you may have heard of the Nudge program, and there are other things part of it too. There's in Britain, it's the Behavioural Insight Team, which is about to be privatised, so it won't be accountable anymore. There's a variety of other programs which are all about influencing people's subjective attitudes to what's happening, to make them feel better about what the government's doing and to change their behaviour. Behaviour modification is a very large part of this. Now, as an engineer and any social scientist as well would know that you have to have feedback to be able to influence things. So any sort of sensor system where you can detect how people are responding, how they feel, is going to make your system more effective. At the minute, they've been doing that indirectly by, for example, observing the markers of people's behaviour, for example, how they spend money, which of course is something that they may actually directly be interested in influencing also. Now, governments aren't interested so much in money as in behaviour and attitudes. And if you can get closer to that, then any sensor that gives more of an indication how people feel is going to be of interest to governments.
Can I just come in at this point with an observation? People are easily swayed. We have somebody, an entertainer over here called Darren Brown. I don't know if anybody's ever seen him, but I tell you what, if I was the Prime Minister, he'd be working for me. I've been to see him twice, and I'm not suggestible particularly, but it's been a really interesting show to go and see him. I don't know how he does it, whether it's NLP, some sort of some type of hypnotism or planting words in your head, and we can be manipulated remotely anyway by our subconscious, and it's about knowing how to tap into that on a human level. But certainly if we're able to do that, and certain people are able to do that, then certainly machines will be able to do it. I think the frequencies we were talking about, Kat, to alter emotion are in between 1 and about 19 hertz, because the Schumann resonance of the Earth is 7.83 hertz. And that's been sort of fluctuating at the moment, but that's we as humans operate well when we're exposed to Schumann resonance. With all the Wi-Fi around and the Bluetooth and the Tetra and 3G, 4G, whatever mobile systems we've got here, Schumann resonance is barely discernible. You have to sort of go into the middle of an ocean to feel it. And the guy that it was named after did some experiments with people putting them underground, so you don't feel these 7.83 hertz overground You don't. Sorry, you do feel it overground. You don't feel it underground. And the humans got sick that were underground. And so we had two groups of humans, one of which wasn't exposed to the Schumann resonance, and another group where he was actually piping in through speakers 7.83 hertz. And the ones that were, obviously this is out of audible range, but the ones that were exposed to 7.83 hertz were okay. The human beings that weren't exposed to it started to get ill, sick, lethargic. And so these extremely low frequencies do interact with our brains and our bodies. And I think there's an institute called the International Institute for Covert. It's IACT. I don't know if you know about them. They have I think it's a half-hour radio show every 2 weeks, and there's some really interesting guests on there that are people that are top of their field in sort of neurology. And yeah, they're of the opinion we can definitely be influenced by this sort of technology. But yes, I think getting us to spend money, mass manipulation of movements of people, the ways that we behave, and this is another note I made as well. Going back to the ancient Greeks, it was if Greece was in a war situation, then the musicians of the cities were told to play in certain musical modes. And if you were in a peace situation, the musicians were instructed to play in another musical mode. So you get Lydian, Dorian. If a musician was found to be playing in a mode that he wasn't instructed to play in, he got imprisoned. I mean, the ancient Greeks knew that vibration and a type of vibration affects your emotions and affects how you react. And we've known about this for thousands of years. As a society now, we've lost that. But they only had music at the time, and then you can sort of apply the same sort of thing to sacred geometry in some of the cathedrals. The ancients were at this in Minehow and Maeshow up in Orkney. The burial chambers there were built for sound. So if a certain sound was emitted from human beings in there, a wall of vibration would be created of ecstasy, of having a spiritual experience, and a human would step into that. And the same with the sacred geometry of the cathedrals around Europe. We've known that frequency can affect us for thousands and thousands of years. As a society now, we've lost that collective sort of knowledge, but certainly it was a very important thing for our ancestors, frequency and sound and how it affects the brain. And if you think of the music, if you think of the film Titanic without the music in, or Lord of the Rings without the music in that, it would be flat. It's that resonance, it's those frequencies that lead us. Sorry, Steve Hernandez.
No, it's funny you should say that, because I know many times in our conversation I always refer back to my dad, but my dad knew so much before there was even computers out and any Skype or any of that stuff, and he would tell me, when you're watching a show, mute it. Mute the sound, and then you will see how you perceive the action on the television in a whole different way. It said then you turn the sound back on, then you're right back in it. So he would tell me to experiment with a lot of those things. My dad I don't know how he had so much knowledge. I just don't understand how, my sister and I would discuss this, how he knew so much of what we're talking about today. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, he knew about it. He knew what was coming. It was unbelievable. And here we are now living in that. And everything that we've been talking about, every one of you that have been speaking, my dad had somewhere along the way had already warned me about that. And each one of us has experienced that. Everything that we are talking about, Nathan, you're absolutely correct. We're commodities, and they're trying to sell us convenience and trying to market us any way they possibly can. Kat, the mind control thing, it's absolutely correct for one reason I know. And here's what I'm going to tell you, and I didn't tell you this last week because we ran out of time. My son and I were watching a show the other day, and he said, "Oh my God, Dad, did you see that?" And I was like, "See what?" He says, "Rewind the DVR, hit play." And so when it was cutting to commercial, they flashed a letter on the screen in between commercials.
Subliminal image, yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Isn't it interesting? Because my youngest son can pick up subliminals on the television, and he'll say exactly the same to me. Did you catch that? I mean, not that I watch much telly, and he will rewind it and go back frame by frame and say there, and he's got
And that's
it.
what my son does. Like, we'll be watching a show, and he's not looking at character. He's looking at the signs and the symbols behind them that like are on the wall or on a picture frame. He catches a lot of different things that I don't catch. But when he said rewind it and look at the letter they just flashed on the television, it just blew my mind. I was like, I remember going to the drive-in when I was a kid. They used to do that. They would flash popcorn candy real fast in between scenes. But now they're putting letters, and my wife's told us don't go back and read those things because it might be something where they can trigger something in your brain already. And I looked over to my right, and I looked at my wife, and I said, here's a woman who never speaks about anything. She's always quiet, and she says, don't go back and look at that because it's possible that they can actually trigger something that's already been implanted. But for me to see it with my own eyes blew my mind.
Wow. Can I just say I'm going to have to go in 3 minutes. I could leave this running if you want, and then when you're all done, you can just hang up. You have to go as well. Kat, I'll tell you what, Kat. You started off, so do you want to wind it up?
Yes.
Just round up.
It was great about the frequencies that you said and all these ancient Greeks, because that human knowledge is there. I was just going to try one thing. There was a big uproar about the magazine Economist listing several subliminal images on its cover. One of them is an angry turtle, which is a sign or emblem, symbol for Fabian socialism, in other words, the New World Order or globalized agenda. A second one is the Piper of Hamelin. Everybody was worried about the Piper of Hamelin because the story, German tale goes that the Piper of Hamelin first took the rats out of the city and then went and put his pipe on, and the children went along with him and disappeared. In other words, the radio frequency was manipulating the children's mind, and the children disappeared from the city forever. So they're really worried that what is happening, are they going to start manipulating children's brains, their mind with radio waves? So we have to watch out for that. That's all I wanted to say, because obviously children are the most important ones of our lives, and they are vulnerable because they do not have this developed free will yet, this knowledge that we could give them, and before we tap into them, they want to tap into themselves, and we have to be very careful, watch out for what's happening with the radio frequencies there. That's all.